Glad to have you.
Yes, sir.
We appropriate to Shirley Wilson. Booked on Shirley.
I am not.
Oh, what's the type?
It's so
I'm Mitch McGarry, sit on the.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm doing that, but that's not my. How's this thing going?
Okay. Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to call the October meeting of the Coronado Roundtable to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Well, we have a distinguished guest today who's in the audience. General R.G. Head, Air Force General, is the author of U.S. Attack Aviation. He's going to preview the book and have a session here on Friday. Thursday?
November 17th.
November 17th. So, thank you, R.G. This works better with glasses, believe me. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you. For many years, the Coronado Roundtable had a very happy tradition of this program being opened with a joke. Well, the COVID crisis wasn't a joke, so we didn't do jokes for about a year and a half or two. So here we go. There were a doctor and a lawyer were attending a cocktail party when the doctor was approached by a man asking what to do about an ulcer. The doctor mumbled something medical. He was asked a question. He spoke again about ulcer treatment. And when the person had left, he turned to his friend, the lawyer, and said, "How do you handle it when you're asked for advice during a social function?" And without blinking an eye, the lawyer said, "Well, I sent him a bill the next day." So the next morning, the doctor arrived at his office and issued the ulcer-stricken man a bill for $50. And the next day, the doctor received a bill for $100 from the lawyer. Later today, this program will be made available on the library's Facebook and YouTube program. This is, I believe, the 17th hybrid program where it's being recorded. It will be made available on YouTube and Facebook, and it's being sent to our audience on Zoom. How many Zoom people do we have today? 9? We have 9 families watching on Zoom today. Okay, today we have assistance from Tara Davies and Selena Valladolid over here. These are our technical people, and we'd like to thank you. In addition, we always have Lyman Green's wonderful coffee, so we like that too. Thank you for Lyman. Now I have 3 comments to make for those of you who are watching on Zoom. This is for your protection. Please push the mute button so that your private conversations stay private. Second, please push the camera button and turn it off so that you can maintain your privacy. Third, I encourage you to use the chat box button and type in your questions as they arrive. We will take your questions during the question and answer period. Future programs. I'm going to love this. Captain Amy Bauer-Schmidt, the first female to command a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. That's our speaker in November. So we're very pleased about that. Thanks to Tom Mercer and Dave Landon for working on that. In December, we do not have programs. In January, we have Dr. Susan Stone. CEO of the Coronado Hospital. She's going to bring us up to date on the developments with the hospital. In February, we have the Port Commissioner, Frank, I'm going to mispronounce this, Uriston. And in March, we have Dr. Gregory Daddis from San Diego State, who holds the U.S. Midway Chair in Modern U.S. Military History. He's going to make a presentation that is in the vicinity of lessons learned from Vietnam. And with no further ado, today's speaker will be introduced by John Jacobson.
Good morning, everyone. Today's speaker is Sally Spener, and since 2012, she has served as the U.S. Section Secretary, Foreign Affairs Officer for the International Boundary and Water Commission. Some of her responsibilities include providing foreign policy advice to the Commission, leading diplomatic matters with the Mexican section of the Commission, and negotiating and drafting international agreements. Prior to her current position, she served 13 years as the U.S. Section Public Affairs Officer, where she established the Citizens Forum, an outreach forum, which is where I know and met Sally. Sally holds a BA from Wesleyan University in Latin American Studies and Theater. And today's topic will be border sanitation projects to keep the beaches open. Ladies and gentlemen, Sally Spener.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Coronado Roundtable, for this invitation to speak today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the International Boundary and Water Commission, our history and our projects, what we do in Southern California, and then I'm going to focus specifically on border sanitation projects to keep the beaches open. So the mission of our commission is to apply the boundary and water treaties between the two countries and to settle differences that arise in the application of the treaties. That is something that we do based on the language of the treaties that have been agreed to by our two governments. Commissioner Hiner, our agency head, who is the presidential appointee, likes to start out her briefings to different community groups, telling a little bit about the resources that we have available. And I can tell you, we use your taxpayer dollars extremely efficiently. We have 252 authorized positions boundary wide. And for the first half of the 20th century and really into maybe even the 1970s, we were focused on developing, constructing, planning new infrastructure along the border. And so for the last several decades, our focus has been on operating and maintaining that infrastructure. And we are doing that with fewer positions. We have 252 staff boundary wide, and we have offices all along the US-Mexico border. And we have looked at our staffing issues, and the commissioner is proposing to increase that number and restore it to a previous level of 313. We have a $100 million annual budget. Half of it is for what we call salaries and expenses, S&E, if there are other, I'm assuming there are other former federal people in the room, and the other half is for construction. We have about $11 million in annual deferred maintenance, and we estimate almost $500 million in deferred maintenance, primarily Rio Grande sediment removal. We operate and maintain Rio Grande flood control projects in various locations along the US-Mexico border, and sediment is an issue that can affect the location of the international boundary if it changes the river channel, as well as the efficient conveyance of water so that it can negatively impact farmers and others who use Rio Grande water, as well as providing flood control. You know, we need to have a good clear channel to be able to prevent floods to communities. We have two major international dams. If any of you like to fish bass, you may have heard of Amistad Dam and Falcon Dam down in South Texas. Several diversion dams, hundreds of miles of flood control levees. We deal with international bridges. We're the agency that officially determines the location of the international boundary, among other things. And I'll talk a little bit more about our sanitation work shortly. The 1944 Water Treaty established the modern day International Boundary and Water Commission. Our primary focus before that was primarily on boundary demarcation. You know, a river sounds like a great thing to be an international boundary, but rivers move all the time. And so back in the day, that was what we focused on. We'd go out, look at the river, see where it had moved, and figure out a way to move it back to reestablish the international boundary. Our structure is that we have a United States section, which is part of the US federal government, and the Mexican section, which is part of the Mexican federal government. The US IBWC is an independent federal commission, but we receive foreign policy guidance and our budget through the US Department of State. We have several positions that are treaty officers, the commissioner, 2 principal engineers, the secretary, and our legal advisor. And we consider ourselves to be both a diplomatic and engineering agency. You'll also hear us talk a lot about minutes. We have 328 minutes of the commission, and the 1944 Water Treaty says that the decisions of the commission are recorded in the form of minutes. And people often think that it's like a city commission, right? You have the meeting, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, they voted to do this. But we consider minutes to be implementing agreements of the treaty. So if the treaty says, as it does, you can build dams on the Rio Grande. We have a number of minutes that say where those dams will be built, how the costs will be shared between the 2 countries, and how they'll be operated and maintained by the 2 countries. They're considered binding international agreements when they are approved by the US Department of State and Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Relations. And one of my major duties at the commission is to negotiate minutes, draft minutes, and go through with the Mexican section of our commission and make sure that every word matches and we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's. And so that's an important part of the work that we do. I love this picture. This is minute 327. Commissioner Giner, the US commissioner on the left, and Commissioner Resendez, the Mexican commissioner on the right. The first time we've ever had 2 female commissioners. It's only the second female US commissioner and the first female Mexican commissioner. And we had a number of minute signings that were outdoors with masks on because they occurred during the pandemic. So the pandemic posed really unique challenges for us and how to do our international work under difficult conditions that so many of us experienced over the last couple of years. I'm going to mention briefly our work in the Colorado River because it definitely impacts Southern California. I'm not going to focus on it during my presentation, but if you have more questions about this subject during the Q&A part of the meeting, I'd be happy to go into greater detail. This is one of my projects for the commission. The US delivers to Mexico 1.5 million acre feet per year of Colorado River water. An acre foot is enough water to cover 1 acre of land 1 foot deep. When there are surplus waters, we can deliver another 200,000 acre feet of water to Mexico. And very importantly, because we are in a drought right now, an extraordinary drought, Mexico is reduced in proportion to the United States. Minute 323 is a very important Colorado River agreement that we have with Mexico. It was signed 5 years ago, and it is an interim agreement through 2026. We had kind of a 5-year pilot that we did on some of these concepts with a previous minute. They worked pretty well. We tweaked them, made some adjustments, and then did this agreement through 2026. Why is it through 2026? Because 2026 is when the domestic Colorado River agreements expire. And so the work that we do with Mexico is intended to be complementary to the domestic agreements on Colorado River drought management. So what are some of the major elements of minute 323? Mexico doesn't have any Colorado River reservoirs, and the treaty says they get an annual delivery. So we deliver that water. They have to put it to use when it comes. It is on a schedule. We coordinate the schedule with them. But by allowing Mexico to defer delivery of water under this agreement, they're able to store water in the US reservoir system and take delivery of it at a later time when it is more beneficial to them. This also boosts the storage of Lake Mead, which is where Hoover Dam is. Hoover Dam forms Lake Mead. And it is the level of Lake Mead that determines the water allocations to users in both the United States and Mexico. So to the extent that Mexico is storing water in Lake Mead, that's helping to keep the elevation up. A lot of US entities are also storing water there to help kind of manage the drought and keep the levels as high as possible rather than taking full delivery every single year. Mexico participates in drought savings. So they reduce the amount of water that is delivered to Mexico with a promise that if and when the reservoir conditions recover, they'll be able to get that water back in the future. Then they also have what we call the shortage savings. That's a reduction that it's just a cut and they never get it back. And again, this is all complementary to similar types of agreements in the United States to manage the drought on the Colorado River. Mexico also has the opportunity to receive additional water during high reservoir conditions. So another key aspect is investment in water conservation projects in Mexico. There is $31.5 million available under the minute from various entities in the United States to do water conservation projects in the irrigation area of the Mexicali Valley in Mexico. In exchange for that investment, the US entities receive a portion of the conserved water, while Mexico derives the long-term benefits of the conserved waters. And so again, this is a benefit to the United States from this investment in conservation in Mexico. There's water for the environment and habitat restoration. That's been a successful part of our work. There's a lot of work being done in the United States along the Colorado River to provide habitat, particularly for birds along the Pacific Flyway. And so this work in Mexico is complementary to that effort as well. We deal with salinity management. Salinity is a significant concern for surface water users in the Western United States. It's naturally occurring. And then we also have some operational issues that we cooperate with Mexico on to control the daily variability in the deliveries to Mexico. So turning to sanitation, I talked about the importance of minutes as being a powerful tool of the Commission. All the treaty says about sanitation is that the Commission shall give preferential attention to the solution of all border sanitation problems. So we took it and we ran with it. We do a bunch of water quality monitoring, and we've been doing that for many decades. And we also have 3 international wastewater treatment plants. There's one that we call the Nogales International Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's located in Rio Rico, Arizona. It is the only one that treats wastewater from both the United States and Mexico. We also have the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant down in San Isidro. It treats Mexican wastewater to US standards. And then we also have an international plant along the Rio Grande in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. It treats Mexican water in Mexico to US standards before discharging it into the Rio Grande. And so the United States government, as well as the state of Texas, helped to fund construction of that plant because otherwise that untreated sewage was going into the Rio Grande and having a negative impact on people in both countries. We also have 4 flood control projects. We have a small project here in the Tijuana River. And the rest are on the Rio Grande. Our commission operates and maintains many hundreds of miles of Rio Grande flood control levees. And indeed, it is a region in the Rio Grande that is regularly impacted by hurricanes. And so those levees protect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people from Rio Grande floods. The Tijuana River watershed, you know, we do this work in the Colorado River, which is a massive basin, and the Rio Grande, which is a massive basin. And I'm always surprised at how big the Tijuana River watershed actually is. It's over 1,700 square miles. I was driving in eastern San Diego County the other day and saw the turnoff for Morena Lake. And I thought, wow, this is really far from the coast. You know, this really is a big watershed. We have the 2 dams in the US, Morena and Barrett, and then they also have 2 in Mexico, Carrizo and Rodriguez dams. This is just a map of the basin, and I think you can see, this is the border here. So this is the part in the United States, and this is the part in Mexico. So you can see that most of that watershed is in Mexico. This is just a picture of a couple of the dams that we have in the United States and Mexico and the Tijuana River. Yeah, right, showing water. We have pictures of different conditions. And the Tijuana River Flood Control Project was built in the 1970s in accordance with various IBWC minutes. It has a design flood that is considered the maximum flood that can reasonably be expected. Mexico has about a 2.5-mile concrete line channel. If you've ever been to the Zona del Rio in Tijuana, you see that big concrete channel, and there are a couple of roads that have overpasses over it. And so that's their portion of the flood control project. In the United States, the concrete channel is really only right at the border. And then it opens up into a velocity reduction structure, and our levees extend to Dairy Mart Road. The original plan in the United States was to continue that concrete line channel well downstream. It was during the 1970s, and there were a number of people in Imperial Beach and nearby communities as we had a greater environmental awareness during that period. And they said, you know, we don't want this concrete thing through our communities. Let's do something different. And so we actually modified the plan for the Tijuana River Flood Control Project. And that allows us to have the beautiful Tijuana River Valley and estuary that we all enjoy today. Also, we have a proposal and have been working on the design to raise and rehabilitate the U.S. flood control levees to meet standards that were established by FEMA following Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana. So when we get the funding for that, we will be doing some improvements to the flood control project in the United States. So this is the concrete line channel. That yellow line that you can see in the left photo is actually the border. We have it painted on. And then when it rains, it can fill up pretty quickly. So the Tijuana River watershed has a number of real challenges. It is affected by sediment, trash, water quality concerns. There are these canyons on the Mexican side, and we're downhill. And there are squatter settlements as well as other neighborhoods that go for many miles up those canyons. And if you travel in those areas, and I have been there, you see people who are using tires to stabilize the land on these steep canyon slopes in order to build their property. The soil is very erodible. There is not reliable trash collection. Some of these communities don't have urban services like sewer service. So sometimes their waste just goes down the hill into the canyon and flows into the United States. So the urban development conditions are very challenging in Tijuana, and because we are downstream, it is having impacts in the United States. These are just some pictures again of some of the challenges that we have. That's a sediment basin in Mexico, the middle photo. And you just see the tires sticking out of it. And so you can build these sediment basins, but somebody's got to maintain them. They fill up, and you've got to go in and remove that stuff. The challenges are significant. You can see the erosion, you know, just in the middle of this street in one of these canyons in Mexico. And you can just see the conditions in the bottom left photo, how it just continues up and up and up. So the challenges are significant in the Tijuana River watershed. So we've had a number of meetings, and there are a number of solutions that are proposed, but they're not easy and they're not fast. And you can see some of them listed there. If you reduce the flow velocity, that'll help. So you're not having rushing water carrying tons of trash and sediment, et cetera, downstream. Improved urban trash collection is one of the things. You can construct basins to capture it, but again, they have to be cleared out regularly. So there are a number of challenges. We know what some of the solutions are, but there are challenges in implementing them. In 2015, we signed Minute 320, which was a Tijuana River watershed cooperation agreement. And this really grew out of the work that the California Regional Water Quality Control Board was doing domestically as part of the Tijuana River recovery team. And so it was determined that there needed to be a formal binational structure for this. So the IBWC signed a minute to provide coordination for stakeholder involvement, stakeholders from both sides of the border in addressing these challenges in the Tijuana River Basin. And it was very specific that sediment, solid waste, and water quality were the main priorities. So through this minute, we established a binational core group, and that's sort of the policy level group that oversees the technical work groups. It includes local, state, and federal government, academics, environmental organizations, and the business community. We had a couple of challenges over the years. There was some litigation, and we didn't think it was appropriate to have people who were suing the US IBWC on the core group making recommendations to us. And so that impeded some of the cooperation that we wanted to establish. The lawsuit got settled. We opened our arms and welcomed those people back. We also had the pandemic. And so of course that implemented our ability to have binational meetings. Anyway, I'm very pleased to say that we are back on the right track. We recently contracted with a new secretariat. The person who's spearheading the effort is a gentleman named Pete Silva. Some of you may recognize that name. He was an assistant administrator at EPA and also with the State Water Resources Control Board previously. So we're getting back on track with that process, and we've had a couple of meetings of the reconstituted core group. So the core group is supposed to identify cooperative measures, arrange for studies, define project participation, help us figure out costs and funding. And so there is a lot of work to oversee the efforts of the work groups on sediment, solid waste, and water quality. And so one of the things that we did as a result of Minute 320 is we did a water quality study several years ago. It covered the Tijuana River as well as its tributaries in both the United States and Mexico. It looked at both water as well as sediment. It analyzed over 200 parameters. And what we found was kind of what we expected. Yes, there are impacts from untreated domestic wastewater affecting the Tijuana River Valley. What we didn't find was a lot of industrial waste. We didn't find a lot of agricultural pesticides. I think there were concerns that we would see things like DDT and others in high quantities, and we did not. So we did see things like ammonia and E. coli and things that are associated with just household wastewater. Another thing that we found was something called DEHP. It's associated with plastics, and we think that because of all the trash that's coming over and the plastics just sit there, we think that DEHP is leaching from the plastic trash. So again, that emphasizes the importance of dealing with solid waste because solid waste is having an impact on water quality as well. So let me go back and tell you a little bit of history of our International Wastewater Treatment Plant. Mexico had a plan starting in the 1980s, I guess, to build wastewater treatment facility in Mexico that would treat to Mexican standards and then would discharge that wastewater. And Mexican standards at the time and still are less stringent than US standards. And they were going to dispose of this partially treated wastewater into the Tijuana River, where it would flow into the United States and go out to Imperial Beach. So the United States wasn't excited about that prospect. So we said, well, we have another idea. Let's build a plant in the United States. It will treat wastewater to US standards and we'll help with the cost. And Mexico, the only thing you have to pay is what you would have spent to build your Mexican plant in Mexico, and we'll cover the difference. And Mexico said, we'll do it. So minute 283 was the first minute that memorialized that concept. It was signed in 1990. And we ended up building the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. It's located right off of Dairy Mart Road. After it was constructed, the city of San Diego actually constructed its water reclamation plant right next door. And both of these plants discharge their byproduct through the South Bay Ocean Outfall. It has won civil engineering awards. And so it discharges a few miles off the coast of Imperial Beach. The plant capacity is 25 million gallons per day. And with a new agreement that I'm going to be talking to you about shortly, we are actually expecting to double the capacity of the plant in the next 5 years. This is an old photo, but we haven't flown it lately to take an updated picture, but I just wanted to give you a sense. On the left-hand side, you see the city of Tijuana. The plant is literally located right on the border. And the bottom right is where you have the Tijuana River. And so then you have our plant in the middle. And then that picture, the top of the picture is actually west at the Pacific Ocean. So that gives you a sense of where we're located with this plant. Just another picture of the plant facilities, and the billboards that you see are located in Mexico. We are right on the border. But it's not just the International Wastewater Treatment Plant that we have. We have water quality monitoring. We test the water as it comes into the plant. We test it as it comes out of the plant. And then we also contract with the city of San Diego to monitor water quality in the ocean. So we have a comprehensive water quality monitoring program. And then we also have some infrastructure in the canyons. This is one of the things that we call a canyon collector. And so the left-hand side, you see that little kind of gated area. That's actually a canyon coming from Mexico, or a culvert, or the flows from the canyon. And it goes into this basin in the United States. The basin allows the water to be pumped to the International Wastewater Treatment Plant for treatment. If you get too much water, like you get a heavy rain, and so sometimes we get, there are just some leaky sewer pipes, and you kind of have this low level, small volume coming through the canyons that gets pumped back to the plant and treated. But sometimes it rains and it exceeds the capacity to do that, and it brings sediment and other debris. So one of the things that we have to do is regularly clear out the sediment and the trash. When it exceeds the capacity, it just flows downstream and goes into the Tijuana River into the United States. You also hear people talk about PBCLA. CILA, C-I-L-A, is the Spanish acronym for the Mexican section, or for the International Boundary and Water Commission. And PB is an abbreviation in Spanish for pumping plant. And so we have this pumping plant in the Tijuana River channel that pumps the water out of the river so that it is not crossing into the United States. The Mexican section of the International Boundary and Water Commission took over the operation of PBCLA a couple of years ago, and we have seen much more reliable operation of PBCLA than we had in previous years. There really has been significant improvement. But when it rains, the capacity of that pump station is exceeded. It can get clogged with sediment and debris. So when it rains, they turn off the pump, let the stormwaters pass. So that's when you're getting the stormwater contamination hitting the beach. And then when the water levels drop low enough and they clear it out, they turn the pump back on. So that's why you hear about wet weather transboundary flows. And you can follow those on Twitter. We report on them regularly. So wet weather flows include 12 million gallons a day of treated effluent from plants in Mexico, urban runoff, including wastewater, and stormwater. So when you hear that we had a stormwater event and we had 50 million gallons of transboundary flow, that doesn't mean 50 million gallons of raw sewage, right? It rained, there's rainwater, the rainwater is contaminated with sewage. So this is another just kind of temporary structure that we have there that helps to control the wastewater that's coming down the Tijuana River channel. It's an earthen berm. It helps to contain low-level flows. When it rains, it's just made out of dirt. It gets washed out. But the crews from the Mexican section of IBWC will go back, or the US section will go back and reestablish it. So it needs to be rebuilt regularly. So Minute 328 is our big, exciting new agreement on San Diego-Tijuana infrastructure. The title of it is Sanitation Infrastructure Projects in San Diego, California, Tijuana, Baja California for immediate implementation and for future development. This was the signing ceremony that we had at the Tijuana estuary. And on the left-hand side, it's probably hard to tell who some of those people are, but we did have members of the San Diego congressional delegation, and Mayor Bailey is in that picture as well. So he came and participated in our ceremony as well. So this is, you'll hear the term USMCA, the USMCA project. And as you'll recall, USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, is the updated North American Free Trade Agreement that was agreed to by the United States, Mexico, and Canada a few years ago. And with the implementing legislation for this agreement in the United States, EPA was appropriated $300 million to implement sanitation improvements for the San Diego-Tijuana region. So Minute 328 is the international agreement related to how we're going to cooperate with Mexico to work to spend the money and have a beneficial impact in both countries to the wastewater infrastructure we see at the border. So it has, under Minute 328, it's $330 million in investment from the United States and $144 million in investment from Mexico. So what are the major elements of it? We expect, as I mentioned earlier, that we will be doubling the capacity of the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. And a very important part of the project is that Mexico will be expanding and rehabilitating the San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant. San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant has existed about 6 miles south of the border for many, many years, and it hasn't been maintained. It is providing minimal treatment to wastewater. We know from the studies that we have done, and we've contracted with Scripps to perform some of these studies, that most of the time when you see wastewater impacts to the Southern California coast, it's from the Tijuana River. But we also get certain times of the year this practically untreated, and some of it is untreated wastewater that's coming into the coast south in Mexico. Certain times of the year, the currents, the ocean currents, carry that contamination north into the United States. And so it is of particular concern because that tends to happen in the summertime, right? And that's when everybody's out at the beach. So the expansion and the reconstruction really of this plant in Mexico is going to have a significant benefit to the United States. And then the other major element of this agreement is there will be rehabilitation and replacement of the sewer pipelines and pumping plants in Mexico. And that's absolutely critical. We had in 2017, in the winter of 2017, they had a major collapse of sewer lines in Mexico. It was, during the winter rainy season, that tends to be when we have most of our problems. And we had months of flow coming across the border as a result of that. And the infrastructure is aged and it really needs to be rehabilitated. So that's going to have a major improvement. So we are already moving forward. We just signed the minute over the summer. And in September, we awarded a $4.5 million contract to get ready for the big project to double the size of the plant. We are determining what needs to be done with the existing plant. It's over 20 years old now. And then to prepare cost estimates and recommend procurement method for plant expansion. The contractor is also going to prepare a detailed scope of work for the project. And construction is already underway on the Oriente collector, which is one of the main sewer pipelines in Tijuana. The programmatic environmental impact statement that is being conducted by US IBWC and EPA is well underway. The public comment period closed in August, and a record of decision is expected in December of 2022, just in a couple of months. We expect Mexico to begin the procurement process for construction of the new San Antonio de los Buenos treatment plant. So they're moving forward expeditiously with that, which is great news. And in spring, they're expected to begin work on the other big sewer pipeline, the Poniente collector. And we are expected to award a contract in summer of 2023 for the design for the expansion of the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. And I mentioned, the desperate need for the work on the pipelines. We had a big problem over the summer. There was actually a highway project in Tijuana right along the border, and they were doing some geotechnical borings to prepare for it. Somebody messed up and they bored right into a sewer pipeline in Mexico. started gushing sewage. It eroded under the pipeline itself. This pipe was just dangling out there. This picture was actually taken after they had done some of the work to kind of shore it back up so it's not just dangling out in midair. The Mexican government did respond very quickly to get this work done. We got a temporary repair done. The photo in one of the previous slides was the 2 IBWC commissioners who went out to the site with some of our local stakeholders. Mayor Gloria and others were there, as well as with the news media to show them the work that was being done. And the permanent fix for all this should be done in a few months. So the conditions are really challenging. This is right along the border, and you can just see the topography is just really difficult. So this is actually just a screenshot from the programmatic EIS talking about the number of days of beach closures. And so you have 3 sites that are there: Borderfield State Park, which is right on the border, Imperial Beach Pier, and then the Silver Strand State Beach. And so what you can see from this is the number of days of beach closures. That, you know, the tall blue line on the graph is Borderfield State Park. The closer you are to the border, the more likely you are to have. And then it decreases as you head upstream. So you're lucky you're in Coronado. The closures here are not as often as they are closer to the border. So here's what you're supposed to remember from this presentation. The Minute 328 projects are expected to result in a 50% reduction in the number of days of transboundary flow and an 80% reduction in the volume of untreated wastewater discharged to the Pacific Ocean 6 miles south of the border. So that's what you're getting for almost $500 million in investment over the next 5 years. There are some other long-term projects that are under consideration and are being analyzed but are not funded for $600 million in improvements that would include treatment, advanced primary or primary treatment of river water, and that would improve those numbers even more. But again, that is not currently funded, but it is something that we are looking at in the future. But this is what we're looking at over the next 5 years, and we think that's significant. Did I just hit the wrong button? Sorry. There we go. And this is just our beautiful coastline at Imperial Beach, and then up at the Silver Strand. This is what we're doing it for, right? We understand how important this resource is to people. We understand surfing is huge for people here, and we understand tourism is important as well, and nobody wants to swim in sewage. I also just wanted to mention, if you're interested in these subjects and want to learn more about them, we have our Citizens Forum program. John mentioned it in his introduction. John's been on our board off and on for many, many years now. And we have regular public meetings where we share information like the information that I've shared with you today. We have our next meeting is going to be a webinar on November 3rd. You can go to our website and figure out how to connect. We're going to have a discussion of the programmatic EIS. Somebody from EPA is coming to talk about that. We will also have greater detail about the contract we just awarded, that first $4.5 million contract to prepare for the big plant expansion. And then our area operations manager in San Diego will be talking about some of the operational issues, including when I showed you that pipeline, dangling there in the canyon. He's going to talk a little bit more about what happened with that project as well. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for our Citizens Forum meetings, and I think I'm right on time for questions.
Thank you very much. Before we have a coffee break, I'm going to say that information concerning their November 3rd meeting, the details on how to key into that webinar will be found if you look at page 15 of this week's Eagle Journal. And with that, we'll take a 5-minute coffee break. Thank you.